We're going to look at a couple of English sentences and see how to take them from English into symbols. Our emphasis is going to be on grouping, how we tell how to break sentences and clauses up into parts, and how we can use that as a way of getting the correct symbolization. We start with this rather silly sounding English sentence, which I won't even bother to read out loud. But as we've said before, you don't want to get hung up in the details of the clauses. What matters here is the grammar, the syntax. And so I've written here a kind of a stripped down version where I've reduced the clauses just to sentence letters, and now the grammar sort of stands out. So the question is, what's the main break? Among these various logical words and phrases, which one does the main job for the sentence? And it's not too hard to see in this case that it's if-then. So the structure of the sentence is going to be if-then. It's worth noticing how we can tell that. We said that if-then is the main break, and for that to be right, what comes between if and then has to be a complete grammatical clause on its own. But it is. Am only if not J is a perfectly good grammatical clause. Likewise, if then is going to be the main break, what comes after then has to be complete on its own as well, and it is. Only if H, both B and N, is a perfectly good grammatical clause. So there's the large-scale structure. Let's drill in a little deeper and have a look at the antecedent. Am only if not J. That's straightforward. The only if tells us that not J is the consequent. That leaves M to be the antecedent of this clause. And now that we've got this symbolized, we don't need to think about it anymore. We can move on to the consequent and simply ignore the antecedent from this point. The consequent is only if H, both B and N. The both groups the B and the N together into a unit. That means the only if applies to the H and tells us that the H is the consequent of this clause. That leaves the both B and N to be the antecedent, and there we have our whole sentence. So this wasn't too bad, it was pretty straightforward, but the thing we've been emphasizing is that each time you take a sentence or a subclause and break it into what you think are the two main parts, you should check to see that each of those parts really is a grammatical clause on its own. If it isn't, something's gone wrong. Now this example sounds really peculiar. If Alfred eats, then Brenda eats, then Chandra eats, then Dmitri eats. Nobody really talks this way, but they could, and if they did, it would be unambiguous and there'd only be one way to parse it. What I want to do here is look and see why that's so. So we've got this blizzard of ifs and thens. Our first job is to decide which if goes with which then, and which of those pairings is the main one. The principle that we apply to get the right answer is that in a case like this, the first if goes with the last then. This if goes with this then. If we didn't do that, we would violate the rule that what we break up as the two main clauses of the sentence, what we say are the two main clauses of the sentence have to be grammatical clauses. So we see here first that Dmitri eats really is grammatical, and what we'll see also is that this still funny sounding thing between the if and the then is grammatical as well. But notice, if you thought this if went with this first then, you could see immediately that something had gone wrong, because that would mean that if Alfred eats would have to be a grammatical clause, and it's not. So the overall structure we're saying is this, but we can confirm as we go along that it works out when we do it this way, that we get grammaticality at all stages. So look between the if and the then and see how we parse that. We apply the same principle. The first if in the clause goes with the last then. Here's the clause. And what we're saying is that the first if goes with the last then. That will break this clause up into two perfectly good grammatical parts. Chandra eats is clearly grammatical, but also if Alfred eats, then Brenda eats is clearly grammatical. And so our whole sentence comes out like this. Each of the ifs introduces an antecedent of some clause. Each then precedes the consequent of some clause. And if we stick to the rule that what comes between an appropriately paired if and then has to be grammatical on its own, this is the only solution we can get. Now you might compare it with this example. This example has the same grouping structure, but because we changed the grouping words, we've got if, either, and both here, it's easier to keep track of what goes with what. This either goes with this or, this if with this then, this both with this and. There's only one way to group it, and we come up with this. The bracketing structure is exactly the same as in our previous example, and exactly as in our previous example, there's actually only one way that we could make this come out grammatically. Notice if we change this either to an if and this or to a then, change this both to an if and this and to a then, we'd be back with the sentence that we just parsed, and we'd have something with the same bracketing structure, but all of the connectives would be arrows. So the point of these two examples is not that they're good examples of how people talk in English, it's that they help us see the importance of this point. When you're symbolizing and you divide a sentence into what you take to be two main clauses, or when you divide a subclause into its two main clauses, at each stage of doing that, the two clauses you've picked out must really be clauses. They must really be grammatical and be able to stand on their own.